Episode 15 of Restoring a Classic Mini. Of all the episodes I've made so far, this has been by far the most challenging and the one I've been worried about filming the most. It sounds simple, all I've got to do is replace the toe board, but I had no idea what was involved and the skills required to do a proper job. I've never done anything like this before, so it was all just guesswork. The first hurdle that I faced was that my rolling jig is actually attached to the toe board, which means to replace the toe board I need to disconnect the car from the jig. This causes me a problem because I can't weld inside the workshop and I rely on the jig to wheel the Mini outside. Plus, once the front of the jig is disconnected, I have nothing to support the front of the car. Fortunately, a friend of mine had sent me something to help, so I just needed to use some spare wood that I had lying around to make a trestle. At this point, I decided to disconnect the part of the jig that connects to the toe board to see if the part of the jig that bolts to the top mounts would support the car, which it seemed to do, although it wasn't quite as strong as before. One question that I see on the forums is about bracing, and it's a question that I had to ask too, as it's all new to me. Apparently it helps prevent the car twist out of shape when panels are removed, and it seems that it's common practice. Now, I'm only intending to remove little bits at a time, so it should help the car to stay fairly rigid, but I believe there's nothing to lose by bracing it, and it's better to be safe than sorry. So for the bracing, I'll be using this square metal. I've no idea the correct name, but Dennis from Classic and Retro Restorations had cut me a few pieces to length quite a while back, so fortunately I have no need to cut them either, as he's rough cut them to size for me already. The problem is that I can't remember where he said to fit them, and I try my best not to keep pestering him. So at this point I literally had no idea what I was doing. I came up with a plan to weld all the bracing bars in, and even started to mark them all up, but ended up changing my mind. I must have spent days just staring at the car and got that confused that I decided just to forget the braces and cut part of the floor out with some tin snips. Now, I've no idea what was going through my mind when I did this, and I actually thought that this would be an easy task to do. But for such thin metal, it was surprisingly tough, so after struggling for quite some time, I ended up giving up. It was also made worse by the fact that I was still making repairs to the garden wall, and there were tools and all sorts of things just lying everywhere, causing a huge mess, and I was really struggling working in these sort of conditions. So I had to make sure that I finished outside before I could continue working on the car, but eventually I managed to get it all sorted. So I had to come up with a new plan. My plan was to attach the subframe that had recently had blasted to make sure that all the holes line up with the toe board. If they did, then I'm going to weld a temporary support across the car to prevent any movement when removing the panel, and I'll prop the car up on the trestle and drill out the spot welds holding the toe board on and use the subframe to align the new toe board. It's probably going to be a case of adding some temporary screws to hold the board on while I reattach the jig, so I can get the car outside to add a few welds, which is going to be a bit of messing about, but I'm hoping that the plan will work. So first job after marking the position of the brace bar is to get the car outside. To get the car outside, I've got to flip it 180 degrees. Typically, I forgot to remove the brace when I turned the car over and it fell off. I have no idea if it's caused any damage to the roof, and to be honest, I don't look. Now, I don't think the primer on the shell is weld through primer, but it was easy enough to remove with a power file. There isn't much metal on this side, but I just need the brace to stick to something. So although it won't be that strong, I'm hoping that I'm going to get away with it. The other side is a bit more solid and gave me something more substantial to fasten it to. I also cleaned up the brace bar as well, as that was quite rusty and quite greasy. Now this is when I realised how much of an amateur I really am. This is only the second time that I've used a welder, the first being the shovel that I welded on a previous episode. So this was all guesswork and the weld quality was terrible. At one point I'd actually gone through the floor and melted it. It was a bit disheartening, but I can't expect to be good just after 2 goes. But the main thing is that surprisingly it was solid. So at this point I decided to call it a day, let it all cool down and wheel it back inside whilst I waited for Dennis to come and drop the subframe off. For anyone interested in seeing some bad welding, here's a couple of photos of the welding that I've just done. Definitely need some serious practice, although I did just notice that my welder settings might be set too high. So this is the subframe back from the blasters. All cleaned and powder coated, although it is a bit dusty at the minute. But for 40 years old it looks pretty much brand new. I added the newly built trestle to support the front of the car and remove the front of the rolling jig. Now I'll skip through how I attach the subframe because I covered that on episode 14, but if that's of any interest then by all means take a look at the previous 2 episodes and you can see exactly how I fitted it. One thing to note though, if you watch those episodes you'll remember that I used stainless steel bolts and that 2 of them I had major issues with as they seized up completely, even though they were just hand tight. But thanks to members on the mini forums I soon found out that stainless steel can suffer from something called gowling or gowling, which I don't fully understand, but somehow something happens chemically to the metal and the nut can chemically weld itself to the bolt, making it impossible to remove. Also stainless steel isn't apparently strong enough for the job, something to do with the various grades of metal. So whilst I was happy to leave the ones on the front as they had nylon locking nuts and the bolts with the toe board, I did get steel replacements for the mounts that attached to the toe board, and Minisport were happy to send the replacements at no extra cost. Disconnecting the jig from the front was easy enough, although it was a little heavy lifting the shell onto the trestle. I had to saw the 2 bolts off that are gold up, and I think I'll be trying to avoid stainless steel in the near future unless they're required for the job in hand. So all I had to do now is remove the toe board. That's easier said than done because power tools give off sparks, and that's a no-no in a woodworking shop with rubber flooring. So it was going to prove challenging, and with no idea what I was doing, I first started by marking where the existing panel fitted, so I'd hopefully have a reference for putting the new panel back on. Then I had to try and work out where the panel finished, as it had so many nearby repairs. Now the only adjacent panels that I'd be keeping is the bulkhead, so that means I should just be able to drill out all of the spot welds and remove the panel. This is a job that should have been fairly easy, but my drill bits were all blunt, and something that I need to add to future shopping lists. After removing a few welds I tried levering the metal away, but it wasn't that easy to do. So I thought if I remove the surrounding metal it might make the job so much easier. I'm guessing this is where most people would use a grinder, but I can't do that in the workshop with it being full of wood, so it's going to have to be tin snips and grips, and this is making me look really amateurish. I was also surprised at how exhausting this was, and at times as you can see I got really frustrated. I realised that I am making this difficult for myself, but I just didn't want to risk having another fire in the workshop. The last one caused around £15,000 worth of damage. Now things were progressing slowly but steadily. I was having trouble locating some of the welds, and doing this was risky as sparks were flying off and getting sucked into the vacuum, but I soon realised that it'd be easy to drill them out from the back of the panel instead. My hands and my arms were absolutely killing me from all the cutting, and I couldn't believe how shattered I actually was. Anyway, next night I was back on it. There was a bit more progress, but I was having trouble cutting through some of the previous repairs, so I ended up having to chain drill it and used a hacksaw to cut through the floor. Finally it was off. All I had to do now is tidy it up back to bare metal where the joint's going to be. I used the power file really carefully and I hand sanded where I could. Again, the sparks were a concern, so I had to be really careful. Then after a quick clean I thought I'd test fit the toe board. At first glance it looked absolutely spot on, but then I saw 2 problems. Firstly, one of the mounts doesn't quite line up, but hopefully I can sort that out. But what bothers me the most, and I only know this now after speaking to British Motor and Heritage who make the panels, that they only make one style of panel, and that's designed for 90s Mini onwards. So although the panel is suitable for a Mini that's 76 and onwards, I'm now faced with the challenge of having to manipulate this panel to fit. But that's going to have to be something for episode 16, because for now I need a day off. Prior to making the videos on YouTube, I worked as a firefighter for nearly 20 years, serving my community and helping to save lives and promote the fire safety message. Unfortunately, an accumulation of many upsetting scenes became too much for my mind to cope with, and after years of failed therapy I was retired from the service on the grounds of ill health and signed off medically from any employment. To keep myself busy, both body and mind, I developed an interest in woodworking and car mechanics, and with already having a hobby in filming and music, I combined my interest and started making videos here on YouTube, filming, editing and composing my own music for my woodworking and car restoration channels Smugwood and Smugwood Mini. Unfortunately, to produce such videos comes at a price, and with minimal funds after being retired from employment, I've turned to Patreon to see if there is additional support out there which could allow me to continue making the woodworking and car restoration videos. In return for support, there are various levels which are explained in more depth at the Patreon link below, but includes the chance to win one of my YouTube projects made throughout the year, and also inclusion into random prize draws open to patrons only. In addition, I'd like to thank everybody who already subscribes to my channels, or watches, comments, likes and shares them, as it all goes to help support my channels, and for that I'm really appreciative. It's my hope that I can continue making the videos for the foreseeable future. Thanks once again for your continued support.